9. Anastasia Yalanskaya. Just days after Russia invaded Ukraine in early 2022, Anastasia Yalanskaya and 2 others were gunned down outside Kyiv after delivering dog food to an animal shelter. The trio were on their way back from Bucha, which is roughly 18 miles outside the capital, when they were shot dead. Anastasia's bullet-riddled car was found near the home of a fellow volunteer who was also killed in the attack. Based on the timing of the tragedy, her family and friends believe the victims were targeted at close range by invading Russian forces. They didn't know why anyone would want to kill the volunteers, but the murders happened amid growing rumors about Russians killing innocent civilians in hopes of scaring the population into submission. The young woman's husband, Yevhen Yelansky, told Canada's Global News Network that he warned Anastasia to be extra careful. He even urged her to consider evacuating the area, like many others were at the time. But the shelter she delivered kibble to had been out of food for 3 days, and her giving nature and desire to help others prevailed over any concerns for personal safety. Yelansky remembered Anastasia as a hero for her selflessness, but was left heartbroken by her death. 8. Kirsty Trupp and Katie Gee. During a trip to the Tanzanian island of Zanzibar in 2013, 18-year-old British nationals Kirsty Trupp and Katie Gee were attacked with battery acid. The young women, who were visiting the island as volunteer teachers, were strolling through the streets of Zanzibar city when 2 men rolled up to them on a moped and threw the chemical at them. They were rushed to the hospital with burns to their faces, chests, and hands. The attacker's motive was unclear, according to police, who said that it was the first time a foreigner had been attacked with acid in Zanzibar. At the time, the vast majority of British tourists who visited Tanzania experienced no major issues. But violent crime was on the rise, and there were growing concerns about an underlying threat of terrorism. Some people speculated that perhaps the young women were dressed too suggestively in a place that's largely Muslim, but that wasn't the case according to Trump, who told the press that she and Katie were dressed according to what was considered religiously acceptable and did nothing to provoke anyone. And as a society that relies heavily on tourism, most of Zanzibar's residents are tolerant of visitors from other culture and don't show disapproval with violence. Sadly, the attackers were never caught. The road to recovery is ongoing for Katie, who's undergone more than 50 operations and is permanently disfigured. It also took years to heal emotionally and to accept the changes to her appearance. In a YouTube video she posted in 2018, she said that she was finally in a better state of mind, but that she was forever changed in many ways by what happened. 7. David Henson. 70-year-old David Henson was working as a parking enforcement volunteer in Houston one day in 2019 when he cited 18-year-old Jade Williams for parking in a handicapped spot. Williams was angry about receiving a ticket, according to Henson, who accused her and 2 others of pushing him up against their SUV. He said that Williams kept challenging him to a fight and followed him while he retreated toward his vehicle. The suspect allegedly slapped Henson in the face, at which point he dialed 911. Williams was charged with assault, and while Henson was left with some minor injuries, he said he wouldn't let it keep him away from his volunteer work for long. He's one of 400 people who donate their time to Houston's Volunteer Parking Enforcement Program, which was implemented in 1995 as a way to crack down on the misuse of handicapped parking spaces throughout the city. While many see the program as a good thing, Williams clearly wasn't a fan of it, even though she could have avoided a ticket in the first place by parking in a non-handicapped spot. 6. Christopher Monzon. 27-year-old Christopher Monzon was campaigning for U.S. Senator Marco Rubio in Hialeah, Florida one day in 2022 when someone attacked him on a sidewalk. He suffered from internal bleeding and a broken jaw and needed to have reconstructive surgery done on his face. In a tweet, Rubio claimed that 4 animals approached the victim and told him that Republicans weren't allowed in their neighborhood, then proceeded to brutally beat him. But a police report only named 2 suspects and made no mention of any political statements being made. The report stated that Monzon was handing out flyers when 25-year-old Javier Jesus Lopez and 27-year-old Jonathan Alexander Casanova blocked him on the sidewalk. One of the men said, "You can't pass by here. This is my neighborhood." In response, the victim reportedly said that he was on public property and could be there if he wanted to be. An argument ensued, and at some point Lopez allegedly slammed the victim to the ground and punched him repeatedly, while Casanova encouraged his dogs to attack Monzon. Lopez was charged at the scene with aggravated battery. Casanova fled and was arrested 2 days later. In the days following the alleged attack, Monzon filed a second statement with police with details that suggest the attack was politically motivated. But his claims remain in doubt, especially after the media called him out for his documented history of being an anti-Semitic white nationalist. In the meantime, Lopez's mother, Diana Rosa Lopez, told the Miami Herald that her son has never even voted, indicating that he's unlikely to get into a fight over political reasons. The situation only seems to be getting messier as it unfolds, and the outcome remains to be seen. 5. Ebola burial teams. In 2014, the African countries of Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone were struck by the biggest Ebola outbreak in recorded history. Red Cross volunteers who helped fight the disease and bury the dead were met with mistrust amid rumors that they were deliberately spreading Ebola rather than helping to make the affected areas safer. People were also angry because in some West African cultures, it's customary to touch and be close to the dead, and they weren't allowed to do this with the remains of their loved ones. As an Ebola patient gets closer to dying, they become more infectious to others, and their corpses remain highly contagious for up to a week after their death. So, it was a priority among volunteers to bury the dead as quickly and safely as possible, leaving families unable to carry out their traditional mourning and funerary traditions. Attacks on burial volunteers were frequent. One woman, 22-year-old Tupu Lopu, told the New York Times that people threw stones at her during a funeral, causing her to fall and then stampeded over her. The violence slowed the efforts to combat the rapidly spreading virus and left those who were trying to help with injuries. And it continued throughout future Ebola outbreaks. In 2019, volunteer Janvier Muhindo told the Times that he was attacked by mourners in the Democratic Republic of Congo, who swung at him with a gardening hoe and threatened to throw him into an open grave. Someone brought a hand grenade to another funeral in the country, causing everyone nearby to scatter and preventing the burial from being carried out. Healthcare workers, many of whom were volunteers, were also targeted and were often turned away from patients' homes, and treatment centers were shot at and set on fire. At some point, medical services were suspended entirely due to the violence. While Ebola has been largely forgotten in much of the world, where COVID-19 has become the main fear, there's been at least one Ebola outbreak in Africa every year since 2014. Thankfully, efforts are continuously being made to get the virus under control, and volunteers have made it a priority to build trust with the communities they serve. 4. Taylor Romack and Sandy Swiss. One morning in 2022, Becca Thompson found a goat abandoned outside the animal sanctuary she owns in Union Grove, Wisconsin. It wasn't the first time someone had left an unwanted pet there, so she did what she normally does and welcomed the goat into the sanctuary, which serves as a forever home for nearly 170 animals. Later that day, the goat's former owner, Bradley Kubiziak, returned to the sanctuary after having an apparent change of heart and decided he wanted the goat back. Thompson would later tell news station TMJ4 that it was the first time someone came back for an animal they surrendered. Some type of disagreement occurred, and Kubiziak attacked two volunteers with bricks: Thompson's partner, Taylor Romack, and the sanctuary's vice president, Sandy Swiss. The victims were injured but expected to recover. Kubiziak fled from responding deputies in his truck and engaged in an hours-long standoff with Racine County Sheriff's deputies before taking his own life in a barn. The attack marked the first, and hopefully the only violent incident to occur at the sanctuary. Since then, the goat Kubiziak dropped off has settled into a new home, and Thompson and her volunteers remain committed to their animal rescue work. 3. Sylvia Romano. While volunteering at a Kenyan orphanage in 2018, Italian national Sylvia Romano was kidnapped. She was taken by gunmen from a rural hotel near the country's southeastern coast. The abductors shot indiscriminately at residents during the crime, injuring 5 people. Their identities and their reasons for abducting the 25-year-old were unknown, but authorities suspected that the men were members of the Islamist group Al-Shabaab, which has a troubling history of violence against activists, aid workers, journalists, and civilians. It was the first kidnapping of a foreigner in Kenya since 2011, when the same group took responsibility for a spate of abductions and murders that threatened the country's tourism industry. Sylvia, who now goes by the name Aisha, was released 18 months later and was reunited with her family in neighboring Somalia. At first, she was welcomed back to Italy with open arms, but she soon fell under widespread criticism for choosing to convert to Islam during her time in captivity. Italian right-wing politicians viciously attacked her in the press with allegations that she went to Kenya with ulterior motives or was brainwashed. Even some feminists and others who claimed to have progressive views took jabs at the young woman's decision to convert, while others defended Sylvia and continued to celebrate her return to the country. But even the most well-intending supporters often promoted inaccurate narratives that made the situation look bad, and what was supposed to be a warm welcome home for Sylvia instead thrust her into the center of an unforgiving controversy. 2. Wildlife workers attacked. Every spring, hundreds of harbor seals travel to the Fitzgerald Marine Reserve outside San Francisco to give birth and raise their young. While volunteering to help keep the area safe for the seals in early 2022, 2 women noticed a man and a woman nearby with an unleashed pit bull. Dogs aren't allowed on the reserve because they can disturb the seals, so the volunteers snapped photos to document the violation with plans to report it to a ranger. One of the suspects, later identified as 22-year-old Unaloto Kiowa, allegedly ran up to one of the women, pulled her hair, and grabbed the camera out of her hands. The other suspect, 25-year-old Raekwon Bush, was accused of throwing the volunteer to the ground and punching her in the head repeatedly. During the attack, the other volunteer ran and got help from a ranger. When the ranger arrived at the scene, Bush allegedly threatened him. He summoned backup from San Mateo County Sheriff's deputies, who arrived to find the assault victim bleeding on the ground. The woman was treated for injuries to her head and face, including several broken teeth. Bush was charged with felony battery, felony assault, and a misdemeanor count of resisting an officer, and Kiowa was also arrested in connection with the case. Shortly after news of the incident broke, it was discovered that he had been accused of assaulting an elderly taxi driver just a week earlier, injuring the victim badly enough to need surgery. To avoid a prison sentence, Bush agreed to testify against Kiowa in exchange for time served. 1. Community worker carjacked. 4 years, a woman known only as Miss Wu has helped keep Oakland, California's Chinatown community safe by volunteering as a safety advocate. After parking her car one evening in early 2022, she checked her surroundings, as she always does, and walked around to the passenger side to grab her purse. Suddenly, she noticed a group of 4 to 5 men approaching. Miss Yu immediately tried to run away, but the men caught up to her. One of the suspects ripped her car key from her hand and threw her to the ground, causing her to hit her head. It took just moments for the perpetrators to get into her car and peel away. The victim was less worried about the cuts and scrapes she received during the attack than she was about her best friend's wedding dress, which was in the trunk of her car when the vehicle was stolen. Miss Yu told ABC7 that the dress was her bestie's dream wedding gown, and that they'd searched for months and tried on dozens of dresses before finding it. Her friend was upset about both the gown and Miss Yu being attacked. Police obtained surveillance footage of the incident and said they were investigating, but it's unclear whether the suspects were ever caught. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be kidnapped and held captive in the woods for 2 months during a volunteer mission in another country, or falsely arrested and thrown behind bars for the same amount of time at a notoriously dangerous and overcrowded prison? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.